Hi there. We'll get started now. So welcome everybody. Firstly, thank you very much for joining today's webinar. My name's Sally McDonald, and for those of you that don't know me or haven't spoken to before, I'm one of the Client Services Directors here at the Bristol office at Alterian. And this month, we're continuing with our Hints and Tips theme of our customer webinar series. And I'm pleased to be joined by Thang, who's one of our senior solution architects, who'll be running through today how Alterian would look at system technical health check for Campaign Manager. So for all of our partners managing campaign solutions for their clients, or our customers who are managing Campaign Manager on premise, this session is an ideal overview of things to look for. So just before I hand over to Thang, for those of you that haven't joined us before, just a few housekeeping points. Firstly, at the end of the 20-minute webinar, we will have some time for Q&A. So if you have any questions that you can think of during the presentation, then if you are logged on via a PC, you'll find the Q&A section at the top left-hand side of your screen. And if you can't find that, then please do email me at customersuccess@alterian.com, as I'll be monitoring this inbox during the presentation. And secondly, we'll also be recording the session today for you to refer back to, and we'll make sure the webinar recording is distributed at some point this week via the links in the email, and we'll also be putting it on the Academy on Monday. So with all of that said, I'll hand over to Thang now, who will be beginning with our presentation today. So over to you, Thang.
Thanks, Sally. Okay, so as Sally said, this session we're going to look at what we'd go through in a health check. So we get asked a lot by clients about how the system should be performing. So we've developed a PS package that can be taken that goes into quite a lot of depth. For this session, what I've done is I've tried to take out the highlights, the things that are sort of easily be investigated and managed. So why do we need a system health check? So the main thing is, as we release different versions, the product evolves. Also with the use of Campaign Manager over time, things are bolted on, things are added which may be slowing the system down. So the system health check is there really to give us a review of is Campaign Manager really performing, and am I using the best practices? That's the key thing here as well. It's a big education piece that's part of the system health check. So one of the big key areas that we look at is the server review. So in here, we try to pick up any configuration changes that have deviated from the original installation. The reason behind that is obviously people move around. If the solution's been in place for a number of years, the knowledge base could have moved around. So we just double check to make sure everything's still as per the installation guides. One of the other things that can really slow down CM is the virus scanners. So we tend to look at the exclusion list that's set up, and those exclusion lists also change with each version because we've moved installation directories around. We've created new surrogate executables potentially. So again, we just double check to make sure everything there is in healthy condition. If we're migrating to newer versions, a lot of the systems change, especially with CM5 onwards. We've introduced a new process called SCV. So we just need to make sure that process is set up and it is working correctly, and all the data flows are flowing around as expected. One of the things that can sort of help on the SQL Server side is just the recovery mode. So recovery mode tells SQL how much login it needs to perform. We tend to recommend simple. That means your footprint for the log files is fairly small, but obviously some clients will have full recovery if they're using ship login. So we just double check that's all in place. This use of SQL has also evolved from CM5, which means that the SQL Server database has a smaller footprint. So what we'll do is we'll run the standard SQL Server reports and just double check that the tables, the campaign recipient event table, is of the size that we're expecting. You know, we haven't got data in there from 3 or 4 years ago, because in CM5 onwards, that table should be fairly lean. We also look at the engine project. So we have lots of best practice in the PS team around how a project should be set up. So we'll look to see where it's located. You know, is it in the C drive? If it's on its separate drive, where the repository is located itself, again, on a separate drive or within the project location. And also moving on to CM5 to support SCV, we've actually split the repositories in two. So we have a client data folder and a campaign system folder. So think of the iLoader scripts that you run, those will always place data in the client data repository. The campaign system repository will be the campaign history, campaign response, and all of the sort of state tables that are required for campaign execution. We can split those in two, going from CM5 onwards. There are various reasons for doing that. One is to support a different A/B switch process, which we support from CM5 onwards. Another is to really separate the two repositories onto separate drives, sometimes for logical reasons, other times for performance, especially if you can attach faster disks to the campaign system repository. That would advantage for the SCV process. We also look at the Cerebrus.ini files just to double check that any configuration values which are there are still valid in the current version. We deprecate some settings, and we also make some settings mandatory as well. So it's a nice little cleanup exercise to monitor the engine project. The data model and the data load is where we tend to spend a lot of time looking. This is really crucial for the sort of ongoing performance of Campaign Manager. We tend to run a database audit report, and from that we can see the number of tables and columns which are in the repositories as a whole. The reason why we review that is because of the Silverlight application, and because it's a web application. Any changes that you make in the back end will cause a schema refresh. What I mean by that is CM will periodically look at Engine to see whether there is any new tables or columns that have been introduced. Now that schema refresh obviously will take a long time if there are a large number of objects in the database. So if there's anything we can remove from the system, it will help with that process. It'll also mean then the front end's a little bit snappier. We'll look at the number of rows in each table just to see the growth. Anything approaching 1 billion, 2 billion, then we'll really need to look at other techniques in the data load and the data model to help support the refresh times and the usage of the application. So a big thing of that is indexing. When we reach larger volumes, indexing becomes a real critical issue. So there are a number of sort of rule of thumb that you can take with indexing. So is it a primary key, in which case it should be indexed? Do I need the table helpers? And they're the little helpers that appear on the bottom left-hand side in campaigns. So where things like when you click on a field which is discrete, it will show all the discrete values. Do those fields need to be used in a crosstab? So the answers are yes to all of those, and the fields should be indexed. All of the fields should be considered to be unindexed. You'll see performance gains on the load as well as storage. So we'll go through and sort of make some recommendations based on that as well. The linking of fields, that's really critical. So again, we have a rule of thumb. So always try to pick a numeric field first. If it can't be numeric, then the text field should be as short as possible. So the database audit helps us in this. So we can see that on the left-hand side, the data type, and the right-hand side, the data type is. And I've done a number of these where it's the same text field on both sides, but one side is say 10, the other side is 60. So we'll make a recommendation to shrink those fields down to 10, and it makes the link perform better. And also, again, you get a storage saving on that. We also look for state tables that are old for completed campaigns. So in CM5, we introduced a new data source setting where campaigns will automatically manage the state tables for completed campaigns. That wasn't there in CM4 days, so it could well be that there may be a number of state tables that are lying around which can be deleted. And again, that goes back to my first point about trying to reduce the number of objects in the system. We also take a look at the data load. We'll spend some time, the data engineer, and try and work out how the data load is being executed. Are we using A/B switch? If we are we using the latest best practice? And that's all documented in the help. Are the script sets well organized? Again, that's really just to make sure that navigation around finding scripts and script sets that are executed are in the right place. And we also have a number of new functions that we introduce in versions. So I'm not sure whether many of you know, but in version 5.8, we introduced new to export functions. So if you use export to file, or dump to file, I think the two commands, if you use them quite frequently, then these two new commands perform a lot quicker. They also do things like export a header, which wasn't there before. So there may be some real, some funky things in the data load where we would export a file first with just the headers and then append the data to it. That's no longer needed. Some new functions in CM6, which has really helped cut down on some of the code that we have here for some of our customers, is update domain from table. It's a new function where we can update a engine table directly from another engine table. Again, we've rewritten some of our code, and give you an idea, 30 lines of code can be reduced down to maybe 6 lines now with that function. So it's always good example for us to minesweep the iLoader scripts and just see where we can improve the performance or the functionality with new things which are now available. So the campaign manager version is also one that we also look at, because it's a big consideration for data modeling and the data load changes. Okay, as we move towards later versions of CM, so CM5, we introduced the SCV functionality, and that's an intraday load mechanism for bringing in campaign history and email manager responses within 5 to 15 minutes throughout the day. So if you're on an older version of the system, it would have performed that process a different way. So again, we can review the scripts to see what needs to be changed and what needs to migrate to support the latest versions. Data load timings is always a one that we always look at as well. Again, this is really to try and work out if there's peaks and troughs, whether there's a slow and upward trend of your refresh. If there is, then it's something that we need to consider. What can we look at to bring that down? So we will look for reviews and spikes within the scripts themselves. Is there any one particular script which is causing a big increase or a steady increase in the refresh timings? If there are, we then drill into those scripts in more detail, and again look to see whether there's any new functionality or different ways of doing things that can help with that load. One of the big things which have changed in CM5 as well is the need to drop links during the data load. Links are self-maintained now, so you think if you're performing that operation every night, there's a big saving there to be had for not rebuilding the links every night. We also take a look at Email Manager. So we'll pull off the last 30 days of the top domains. That's a standard report that's available in Email Manager, so you can run this anytime you want. So we'll look at the delivery rates, the bounce rates for particular domains, and look to see whether there's any high unsubscribes in the last 30 days. We also compare that against industry standards. So we do a bit of research to see what's out there, look at the various sort of email knowledge bases, and we've pulled together a sort of a standard grid of what we expect in each industry vertical. So retail will have a certain profile, and subscriptions will have a certain profile. So we compare the industry standards to your actual figures, and if there's any sort of results which are sort of problematic, we'll highlight in the report, and then obviously you're more than welcome to arrange a follow-up session with one of our deliverability experts who can talk through the results in more detail and can actually look at your email manager account to see whether there's anything untoward that's going on. And it could well be that you've got a broken links throughout your creatives, and that's what's causing deliverability issues. Campaigns is a really big area here. So again, we spend a couple of days talking through the campaigns with the campaign executives. We'll take a couple of campaigns which are in operation, and we'll talk through them, we'll step through them to make sure that the campaign is doing what you're expecting, and also whether there's any different ways of making the campaign work better. It could well be that there's a couple of campaigns which are all interacted, and whether we can pull that into one campaign and trigger things within there. Active campaign for no end date is a consideration that we look at. The reason behind that is it could well be that all of your audience are in the end track. The campaign has in all sense and purposes finished, but there's no end date. So if there's a high number of these, then obviously there's lots of polling that campaign manager will be doing, which is unnecessary. Okay. The state tables I've already mentioned before. So again, we do a mind sweep of any state tables. Are they still active? Are they relevant? If not, we'll recommend dropping those. We tend to look at a lot of the test campaigns as well. We have some clients that will create test campaigns. Then rather than making those test campaigns the live ones, they'll create a copy and activate the copy as the live campaign, which then means they leave some data behind. There's there's some tactic output tables that may be lying around that need to be cleared up. There's state tables for these test campaigns as well. Again, we look at the test campaigns with no end date to see whether there's any performance hits by having those still running. Campaign variables is a bit of a sort of a rule of thumb that we have to work with you. So we always say you can have as many campaign variables as you would like, but you need to understand the performance impact on campaigns by having them. So there are two types of variables within Campaign Manager. There's global and local. Global variables will be created with every campaign, and they appear on the campaign state table. Do you think when you start up a campaign on the very first time, if there's a new global variable that's in there, it has to then maintain the state table, the campaign key state table, before it actually does any work. So there's an overhead there with all these global variables. Local variables are only created when we execute the campaign, and they're stored at the state level, the state table level. So they're created at point of setting the campaign variable, which is typically just before tactic output. So the thing to bear in mind as well is that all the global and local variables are added to the campaign history. So if you say you have 10 global variables, 50 local variables spread across different campaigns, that could equate to 60 columns being added to the campaign history table, of which only certain portions of that data are valid for certain campaigns. So what you'll have there is a large data storage footprint, which potentially for low population of data. So it's just something you just need to bear in mind. And again, we work through with you the examples and the possibility of removing some of those variables if they're not required. We've got some iLoader scripts and SQL processes that we can share during that time to help clear this down. So that's sort of the end of the presentation. I thought just give you a sort of a taster of what we do.
Great, perfect, Thang. Thanks for that. A lot of really great information in there, and I'm personally really glad that it's actually been recorded, because I'm sure everybody will like to go through that in their own time. And yeah, thanks for that. So I'm just going to have a quick look at the Q&A box to see if we've had any questions that have been asked, and we have. So one quick question for you: how long does the health check take, and how many times per year would you recommend going through a health check?
So the health check that we perform takes around 3 to 5 days, depending on the complexity of what we're looking at. We tend to drive it first from a sort of an issues list. Mm-hmm. So the health check itself spans lots of different key areas, mm-hmm. but if you're experiencing problems in a specific area, we will spend more time in that area to try and work out what's going on. The health check is only an initial plan. From the back of the report, we can set up a sort of a plan of action for next steps. So obviously we can pick the low-bearing fruit first, get those issues resolved quickly, and then work out a bigger, longer time scale to work out the bigger issues. I mean, the health check itself, probably twice a year, just mm-hmm. to make sure it's ticking over. If there's something that needs to be managed ongoing, then we work out a project plan for that, a proper plan to get you back onto a healthy state.
And if a client has limited time and in your experience, what are the sorts of things that come up time and time again, or things, you know, really quick and easy things that our partners and customers can look at to kind of say, yeah, here are the top 3 things that Alterian are seeing all the time when they're performing their health checks?
It tends to be the data model. Now, that's not really a quick win in itself, but looking at the data model would alleviate a number of other issues. So you think, you know, even though it's a complex thing to tackle, you could knock off maybe 4 or 5 issues that have been encountered. But just really simple things like looking at the data types, you know, looking at the text columns. If you've got a text column which is 250 long, is it really 250 long, or can I reduce that down? Now, that really improves the storage and the data loads, as I said before. The state tables is a really good one. They're moving from 4 to 5. There was no sort of auto maintenance beforehand. Now there is. So let's clear off all the old ones before we move on to CM5. And a lot of it's an education piece as well. You know, we add new things into the product all the time. So we just need to make sure that, you know, clients and customers are fully aware of the new things that they can take advantage of. I think, you know, between those, you know, when we hand it over, some clients just then take on and work through the plan themselves without again helping, you know, needing us to help them again.
Yeah, it makes sense. And I think, you know, Thang referred to a lot of best practice, a lot of hints and tips within that presentation. And what I was going to quickly run through now with the time that we have left is just to show you where some of that documentation can be found. So I'm just going to quickly take over the screen share from Thang and share with you my screen. Thang, can you just confirm that you can see my screen? Oh.
There you go. It's coming through now.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay, yeah.
Great. So if you're not a member of the Alterian Academy already, please do email learn@alterian.com and we can get you guys signed up. But if you want to find the links to our documentation store, then if you head to the videos and resources section here, you'll find at the bottom of that link here link to all of our help documentation. And as part of that, let me just move my screen down. There are a couple of things that Thang mentioned today. So the first thing here we have are our installation and upgrade guides. Now, Thang mentioned earlier, you know, he mentioned a lot about CM5 and SEV and CM6. And although these installation guides are focused here on CM6, a lot of this is backward compatible. So you will be able to look at this as well if you're looking at version CM5. And I think some of it also Thang from CM4 backwards as well. Thang also mentioned the data load process guide. So here you can see we've got some documentation here on how to implement a data load strategy for Campaign Manager. He also mentioned A/B switching, helping minimize downtime as well. So, and we actually have a document. I'm not going to be able to scroll down here. Here we go. We actually have a document here through this link which helps you guys understand how to minimize downtime with our A/B repository switching best practice guide. And last but by no means least, we have an overview here within the documentation around cardinality and storage. So here it's looking at field storage, discrete versus generic, and understanding, you know, understanding the data and understanding the best way to store that data. And as I mentioned, all of this is accessible through Alterian Academy. What I will do off the back of today's webinar is in the follow-up email is send out links to all of that documentation as well as the recording from today. And with all of that said, I'm just going to check through the Q&A. I'm just going to stop my screen share. I'm just going to check to see if we've got any last-minute questions, which we don't. Great. And just to wrap up and say thank you very much for joining us on today's webinar. Really do hope you enjoyed the session. As Thang mentioned, we actually have an Alterian professional services work package of a technical health check that is now available. So please do talk to your partner services managers, your client services managers, if you'd like to find out more. And with all that said, thank you very much and hopefully see you guys next month. Thank you. Cheers. Bye.